Hopes of a New World, 1607 to 1750. The colonies before the storm. The American Revolution's seeds were sown long before muskets fired at Lexington. In the early 17th century, England planted its first permanent settlement in North America, Jamestown, Virginia, 1607. Over the next century and a half, 13 distinct colonies grew along the Atlantic seaboard. They were a diverse mosaic. New England colonies like Massachusetts and Rhode Island were centers of trade, shipbuilding, and Puritan religious values. Middle colonies like Pennsylvania and New York had fertile farmlands and religious tolerance. Southern colonies like Virginia and South Carolina thrived on plantation agriculture, dependent on enslaved African labor. Though under the British Crown, the colonies developed their own legislatures, legal systems, and cultural identities. This relative independence was possible because Britain followed a policy historians later called salutary neglect, letting the colonies govern themselves in most local matters as long as they remained profitable. Colonists saw themselves as loyal Englishmen with the rights of English subjects: trial by jury, freedom from arbitrary taxation, and representative government. These rights would later become the rallying cry for independence. The French and Indian War. The turning point, 1754 to 1763. In 1754, a conflict erupted between Britain and France over control of the Ohio River Valley. This war, known in America as the French and Indian War and globally as the 7 Years' War, drew in Native American tribes, colonial militias, and European armies. The young George Washington gained his first military experience here, leading a skirmish at Fort Necessity. After 9 years of fighting, Britain emerged victorious in 1763, gaining Canada and vast western territories. But victory came with a cost. Britain's national debt had nearly doubled. The war also left Britain with the task of governing and defending this expanded empire. London's solution was to make the colonies share the financial burden, and that decision would ignite resistance. Laws, taxes, and protests, 1763 to 1770. The Proclamation of 1763 was Britain's first post-war measure, forbidding colonists from settling west of the Appalachian Mountains to avoid conflict with Native Americans. Settlers, eager for land, resented this restriction. Then came the taxes. Sugar Act, 1764, taxed imported molasses and sugar. Stamp Act, 1765, required paid stamps on legal documents, newspapers, and even playing cards. These measures enraged colonists. Not because taxes were high, in fact, Americans paid far less than British citizens, but because they were imposed without colonial representation in Parliament. The rallying cry, "No taxation without representation," echoed through towns and taverns. Protest organizations like the Sons of Liberty emerged, using petitions, boycotts, and sometimes intimidation of tax collectors. In 1766, Britain repealed the Stamp Act but passed the Declaratory Act, asserting its right to legislate for the colonies in all cases whatsoever. Tensions exploded on March 5, 1770, in the Boston Massacre, when British soldiers fired on a crowd, killing 5 colonists. Samuel Adams and other leaders turned the incident into powerful propaganda for the Patriot cause. Punishment, and Unity, 1773 to 1774. Although tensions eased briefly, Britain miscalculated again with the Tea Act, 1773. Designed to rescue the British East India Company, the act allowed it to sell tea directly to the colonies at a cheaper price, but still taxed. Colonists saw it as a trick to accept Parliament's right to tax. On December 16, 1773, Boston rebels, disguised as Mohawk Indians, boarded ships and dumped 342 chests of tea into Boston Harbor, the Boston Tea Party. Britain responded with the Coercive Acts, 1774. Boston Harbor closed until the tea was paid for. Massachusetts charter revoked, limiting self-government. Quartering Act expanded, forcing colonists to house British troops. These intolerable acts united the colonies in outrage. In September 1774, the First Continental Congress met in Philadelphia, bringing together delegates from 12 colonies. They agreed to boycott British goods and prepare militias for possible conflict. The first shots of war, 1775, By early 1775, Britain's military governor in Massachusetts, General Thomas Gage, prepared to seize colonial arms stored in Concord. On April 19th, British troops marched from Boston, but riders like Paul Revere warned the countryside. At Lexington, a small band of militia faced the British. A shot rang out. The shot heard round the world. The British pushed to Concord, destroyed some supplies, but were ambushed and harassed all the way back to Boston by thousands of angry militiamen. The Second Continental Congress convened in May 1775, appointing George Washington as commander of the newly formed Continental Army. In June, the bloody Battle of Bunker Hill showed the British could win ground, but at a terrible cost. From rebellion to independence, 1776. For months, Congress debated reconciliation versus independence. But events pushed them toward the latter. King George III rejected the Olive Branch petition. Thomas Paine's pamphlet Common Sense argued persuasively for a break from monarchy. On July 4, 1776, Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, penned mainly by Thomas Jefferson. Its words, "All men are created equal," would echo through history, even if their promise was not yet fulfilled for all. The war turns global, 1776 to 1778. The early war years were grim for the Patriots. Washington suffered defeats in New York and retreated into Pennsylvania. But his daring Christmas night crossing of the Delaware to surprise the Hessians at Trenton revived morale. The war's turning point came in October 1777 at Saratoga, where General Horatio Gates forced the surrender of British General Burgoyne. This victory convinced France to openly ally with the United States, providing crucial military and financial support. Hardship and resilience, 1777 to 1780. The winter of 1777 to 1778 at Valley Forge tested the Continental Army's endurance. Lacking food, clothing, and shelter, thousands suffered and died. But under the training of Prussian officer Baron von Steuben, the army emerged more disciplined and effective. Meanwhile, the British shifted focus to the south, hoping for loyalist support. They captured Savannah, 1778, and Charleston, 1780. But guerrilla warfare by leaders like Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, wore them down. Yorktown and Victory, 1781. British General Cornwallis moved his army to Yorktown, Virginia, expecting rescue by the Royal Navy. But Washington, in coordination with French General Rochambeau and Admiral de Grasse, trapped him. After weeks of siege, Cornwallis surrendered on October 19, 1781. This effectively ended major fighting, though skirmishes continued. Peace and the New Republic, 1783. The Treaty of Paris, 1783, formally ended the war. Britain recognized American independence and ceded land to the Mississippi River. The revolution had toppled an empire's control and birthed a republic, but left deep challenges. Enslavement persisted despite the rhetoric of liberty. Native American lands faced greater encroachment. The weak Articles of Confederation would soon give way to the U.S. Constitution. The Continental Congress, politics of rebellion. While soldiers fought in the field, the Second Continental Congress became the beating heart of the revolution. It faced impossible challenges: how to finance the war without the power to tax, how to manage relations with powerful allies like France and Spain, how to keep 13 fiercely independent colonies united. Men like John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Richard Henry Lee, and John Hancock debated fiercely. Some feared declaring independence would invite total destruction if the war was lost. Others argued that only full independence could secure liberty. The Olive Branch Petition of 1775, a final appeal to King George III, was rejected outright. The king declared the colonies in open rebellion. This rejection pushed even moderates toward independence. Washington's army, ragtag but determined. When George Washington took command of the Continental Army in 1775, he inherited a force of poorly trained, poorly supplied volunteers. Muskets varied in caliber, uniforms were rare, food was scarce. Washington's leadership became a decisive factor in sustaining the army. He insisted on discipline and training, often against the will of militia who preferred informal fighting. He balanced aggression with strategic retreats, avoiding total destruction of his army. He used intelligence networks like the Culper spy ring to outmaneuver the British. The crossing of the Delaware and victory at Trenton was a masterclass in morale-boosting warfare, striking when the enemy felt secure. Major battles in depth. Battle of Long Island, August 1776. The British landed with overwhelming force in New York. Washington's army was outflanked and nearly trapped, but a daring nighttime retreat across the East River saved the Continental Army from annihilation. Battle of Saratoga, October 1777. This was the war's turning point. British General Burgoyne's slow advance allowed American forces under Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold to surround and force his surrender. This victory convinced France to formally ally with the United States. Siege of Yorktown, October 1781. In the final decisive blow, Franco-American forces trapped Cornwallis by land while the French Navy blocked British reinforcements by sea. After weeks of bombardment, Cornwallis surrendered over 7,000 troops. Life on the home front. For civilians, the war was both inspiring and devastating. Women took over farms, shops, and even joined the fight. Deborah Sampson disguised herself as a man to serve in the army. African Americans faced a cruel choice. Some fought for the Patriots hoping for freedom. Others joined the British after promises of emancipation. Native Americans were divided. Some tribes sided with the British, fearing American expansion. Others allied with the Patriots. Shortages, inflation, and British blockades strained colonial economies. Yet public support endured, fueled by local committees and revolutionary newspapers. The Global War. The Revolution was not just an American-British conflict. It became part of a global struggle. France sent troops under the Marquis de Lafayette and naval support that proved decisive at Yorktown. Spain attacked British holdings in Florida and the Mississippi Valley. The Netherlands provided loans and trade support. British forces were stretched thin, fighting not only in America but also in the Caribbean, India, and against France and Spain in Europe. The betrayal of Benedict Arnold. One of the war's most infamous stories is Benedict Arnold. Once a patriot hero at Saratoga, Arnold grew bitter over perceived insults and lack of recognition. In 1780, he conspired to surrender West Point to the British. The plot was exposed when British Major John Andre was captured. Arnold escaped, joining the British as a general, his name forever linked to treason. Financing the Revolution. Without the power to tax, Congress printed Continental currency, which quickly lost value. They relied heavily on foreign loans, particularly from France and Dutch bankers. Robert Morris, the financier of the Revolution, used personal credit to keep the army supplied. Diplomacy and the Treaty of Paris. Peace negotiations began in 1782. The American delegation, Benjamin Franklin, John Jay, and John Adams, skillfully secured favorable terms. Recognition of American independence. Boundaries extending to the Mississippi River. Fishing rights off Newfoundland. The treaty was signed on September 3, 1783, and ratified by Congress in January 1784. The aftermath. The war's human cost was immense. Around 25,000 Americans died, 1% of the population at the time. Tens of thousands of loyalists fled to Canada, Britain, or the Caribbean. Native American tribes faced increased pressure as American settlers moved west. Politically, the Articles of Confederation created a weak central government, a flaw that would lead to the Constitutional Convention in 1787. Legacy. The American Revolution was a beacon to oppressed peoples worldwide. It proved that Enlightenment ideals could be more than philosophy, they could shape nations. Yet the Revolution's promise was incomplete. Slavery persisted, women lacked political rights, and Native Americans were excluded from the new vision of liberty. Still, the Revolution left an enduring legacy. A nation founded on the belief that government exists to serve its people, not the other way around.